Here you have another table of values. So you have your x values or input values, also known as independent variable values. And then you have your y's, or your outputs, or your dependent variable values. And what you're tasked with doing is writing the function g of x. And if you're writing that in general form, you're going to need the slope, and you're going to need the y-intercept. Then you're going to calculate what g of -9 is. So you're going to plug in -9 for x, and then find out what the output is. That's for this one right here. And then for this one, what you're doing is you're being told that the output, g of x, the output is -54. And you're going to figure out what the input is at that point. So that's the goal. First part of this quest is to figure out what either the slope or the y-intercept is. So if we're going to be figuring out the y-intercept, that happens when x equals 0. So we're also looking for the y value when x equals 0. I see that I know when x equals 9, all the way down to 1, but I don't know what the y value is when x is 0. But I would imagine that that will be clear if we figure out what the slope is, or what the pattern is. All right. So let's look. As we're moving in this direction, I see that this is -12, because 18, the difference between 18 and 6 is 12. And then if I do 6 minus 12, I end up at -6. If I do -6 minus 12, I end up at -18. If I do -18 minus 12, I end up at -30. So as the x values increase, my y values go down by 12. And if it helps you picture, as my x's get bigger, my y values are getting smaller. So that means that we have a negative slope. And that resonates with what we said, because we said that each time the y values are changing by -12. So now let's look at our x's, because you might be tempted to say that the slope is -12. But let's wait to decide. So now look at our x's. We go from 1 to 3, that's +2. 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 2 is 7, 7 plus 2 is 9. So up here, as our x's go up by 2, our y's go down by 12. So we have a negative slope, and if we're looking at rise over run, vertical is our y-axis, and horizontal is our x-axis. Remember, because our axes are like this, vertical, horizontal. Our slope is actually -12. That's our rise, over +2. So our slope is actually -6. All right, so we've got our slope, but now we need, the reason we were calculating that first is so that it would be easier to see what this value right here is. So let's think about this for a second. When we go down 2 x values, we go up 12 y values. So if we're only going 1 step from 1 to 0, the amount that we're going to add on is going to be half. When we go in this direction, our x's are getting smaller and our y's are getting bigger. So we're going to add 6, half of this on, to get to what the x of 0 is. So if we add 6 onto this, we'll be at 24. So we know that when x is 0, the y is 24, and that is our y-intercept. So now that we know our y-intercept and we know our slope, we're perfectly able to write our function in general form. Now remember, general form is that our function is going to be slope times x plus b. So our slope is -6. And then we put the x, and then our y-intercept is 24. So our function is g of x equals -6x plus 24. The next thing we're doing is figuring out what is the value of y when we input a -9. So when x is -9, what is our y value? So all we have to do for that, as you're probably thinking, is we're going to substitute -9 in wherever we have our variable of x. So our x is here after -6, so we're going to substitute a -9 in there. And so instead of doing -6 times x, we're going to do -6 times -9, and then -6 times -9 is 54. And then we bring our plus 24. And so when x is -9, our y is 78. So we have calculated that when -9 is our x, that 78 is our y. Now, the next thing is kind of in reverse, right? In this circumstance, we're given that our output is 54. G of x is our output. It's kind of like saying y equals -54. And so we want to know if our g of x is -54, what is our x value? And so let's use our function. In our function, it starts off with g of x. And we know in this case that g of x is -54. So we can just substitute that in for g of x in our function. And then we write the rest of our function. -6x plus 24. So now this is just a matter of solving for x, or isolating x. So our first step is to isolate -6x by doing the opposite of plus 24 on both sides, so -24, -24, because this will get negative 6x by itself, because 24 minus 24 equals 0. So this leaves us with just negative 6x on the right-hand side of the equal sign, and then negative 54 plus negative 24 is negative 78. And now, to isolate the x, we have to get rid of the negative 6. This means negative 6 times x, so this is multiplication. The opposite of multiply is divide. And if you ever can't remember what to divide by, just remember that this needs to be divided by something that will equal 1 when you divide. And I know that if I divide negative 6 by negative 6, those things are going to be 1, leaving me with just 1x, which is exactly what we want. So we're dividing both sides by negative 6. And that is going to mean that 13, because that's what negative 78 divided by 6 is, equals x. And what we've just figured out is that when y, or g of x, is 54, that our input, or our x value, is 13. And so we have successfully addressed all of these prompts in this section.